going on? I'm known as Dark Calamity on the internet, from Carm and Pal Talk. My real name is Jacob. I'm basically going to make these videos to help equip the other Christians to learn how to defend the faith. I'm a Christian apologist myself. I have no degrees. Started Apologetics about 3 years ago. I went to carm.org. Matt Slick, he has a great ministry there. Got into apologetics, and ever since then I've been doing philosophy and learning more about the Lord and studying Scripture and that sort of deal. So basically, I'm going to start making these videos to help teach other Christians how to defend the faith from some pretty cliche questions that they would get from atheists and people of other religions. And today, what I wanted to deal with was an issue called the problem of evil. More often than not, when it's talked about in a more crude manner. Basically, what the problem of evil says is this. It says the idea of an all-good God or a good God, period, is logically contradictory to a world that exists in which there is suffering and evil. And the idea here is that, well, if there was a good God, that God would stop evil and suffering. We live in a world in which evil and suffering exists. Therefore, a good God doesn't exist. Well, from the outset, this seems like a pretty strong argument. I mean, how many of us have, not turned the television on and seen horrible things, a woman raped or a child murdered, this sort of deal, and it tugs on our heart. And I'll have to admit that sometimes, even now, as a Christian, when I turn the television on and see these things, it shakes my faith a little bit. But there's two ways really to approach this problem. There's an emotional way and there's an intellectual one. What we want to do is be rational. First and foremost, we want to be rational. And when someone says something like the existence of evil is evidence that a God doesn't exist, you have to first ask them what they mean by evil. What do you mean by evil? What does that mean? What does morality mean? Evil, these sorts of things. It's a very, very important question, because typically in today's society, people take evil or bad to mean something that they don't like. Well, is that really what it is? Well, let's follow that to its logical conclusion. I don't like construction work at 5 a.m. while I'm sleeping. Does that mean that it's evil? Does that mean that it's wrong? No, of course not. Now, William Lane Craig, who's a prominent Christian philosopher, he's a great apologist, said in his book On Guard that there are two categories when we're talking about morality. There are moral values and there are moral duties. Moral values would be what you might prefer. Moral duties is what you are obligated to do, right? So basically what's going on here is this. The atheist is outraged, rightly so, at morally reprehensible actions that go on in the actual world. Yet he has no real justification for even really claiming that evil exists in the world, because if atheism is true, there is no quote-unquote evil. Okay? So what I would say is this. The existence of evil is actually evidence for a God, because in order to have evil, you must have a standard for righteousness, right? It's the same thing with a football field. How do you know that you have 100 yards without the measurement of a yard? It's the same thing here. Ultimately, what's happening is this. The atheist is speaking like an atheist, but he's acting in his actions as if he's created by a God, because he finds things morally reprehensible. Now, atheists will tell you typically, well, that's possible in an atheistic universe. Well, do I even grant that a universe is possible in the first place? That we should be having this conversation if no God exists? No, I don't grant that. We can move past that, maybe just to get the conversation rolling, and say, well, you ask the atheist, what do you mean by evil? What evil are you talking about? Because if no God exists, the people being blown up at the Oklahoma City bombing is nothing but the scattering of protoplasm, is basically all it is. So make the atheist back up what he says. Um, that's one of the most important things that I'm going to keep reiterating throughout these videos, is that more often than not, Christians who go into apologetics don't understand that when the atheist makes a claim, they have a burden of proof just like we do. So if we were to go up to an atheist and say something like, well, God exists, at that point, if the atheist challenges us, we have what's called a burden of proof. It's up to us to show the evidence or to convince, to provide a case. And same thing here. Now, something very tricky that typically happens that I didn't catch onto until a few years into my apologetics was that the problem of evil will often be it'll often be framed in this question: if a God exists, how do you explain evil? Right? You'll hear that a lot. If God exists, how do you explain evil? Now, what they're trying to do is form the question to shift the burden of proof onto you. And here's the thing: you don't have a burden of proof here. The claim that the atheist is actually making is that a world in which evil exists is logically contradictory to if you were saying that a good God exists, or a perfectly good God exists. So what you need to do is say, well, the claim would be that having a world in which evil exists and a good God exists is logically contradictory, but you're going to have to give me some justification for that. And more than likely, they'll say things like, well, there are horrible things that happen in the world. You have rapes, murders, these sorts of these sorts of deals. And if a good God exists, he'd stop them. Well, why? Well, why should I accept that? Why should any of us accept that? There seems to be no justification for that. So granted, there are way more sophisticated arguments in a different form for the problem of evil. I'm just pretty much giving you a basic idea of how to get the conversation started. But if you guys have any questions at all, make sure you send me some comments here on YouTube, and I would be more than happy to answer them. So I hope that you guys found that helpful, and God bless.